Hi, welcome to The Power of Pod Compels You. We're Bruna and Lisa, two horror PhD candidates. We love horror and we love overanalyzing it. Each 2 weeks, we'll be analyzing one film that we either love or don't actually love. This week, we'll be talking about A Quiet Place, the 2021 film directed by John Krasinski. Just so you know, there are going to be major spoilers for A Quiet Place Part 1 from the beginning. And if you haven't watched Part 2, you're free to listen for the first 50 minutes that we're going to keep spoiler free. And then we're going to start then introducing spoilers to the episode. If you don't really mind, that's okay. But if you do mind, be careful. But don't worry, we're going to tell you when that comes.
Quiet Place Part 2. It's the sequel to, of course, A Quiet Place, which was directed by John Krasinski, and it's about creatures who come to Earth and attack if you make any sound. The original film saw John Krasinski act alongside his wife, Emily Blunt, as parents to 3 children as they try to navigate a silent life. Deaf actress Millicent Simmons as Reagan played their child, providing an additional challenge for the family, which also meant a super original and unique sound design for a horror film. So in this part 2, the family is facing additional challenges after the father of the family died in the first film, and they are looking for a new place to stay. They find their old family friend Emmett, who's played by Cillian Murphy. So to start off, I just wanted to ask, did you like the first film?
Yes, I think A Quiet Place Part 1 was an amazing, amazing film. I watched it at the cinema and it just completely blew my mind.
Yes, I was writing a review about Quiet Place 2 the other day, and I literally put in that I thought A Quiet Place, the first one, was for me a nearly perfect horror film. I just thought it, 100% amazing.
I even went to the cinema twice to watch the film, and it was such a weird experience because I remember having, like a full tub of popcorn and not being able to eat because everything was so silent and everyone was so silent.
My boyfriend literally, I remember he opened like a crisp pack or something, and everyone just like looked at him, and I looked at him, and he slowly started putting it back in his bag, and he was like, "Oh no, I didn't realize this film was gonna be this quiet."
Yeah, no, it's a complete silent film, like no one says anything. And that is different on the second film because, I thought that the second film was going to have the same idea, like he was going to be silent throughout the whole film. Especially now as focuses more on Reagan, so she's the protagonist here, and she's deaf, of course. So I thought that maybe it would happen the same thing that John Krasinski did in the first film. I thought that he was going to do in the second one, which he did to a certain extent, which is to whenever we're seeing the film through Reagan's point of view, then the sound dims a little bit, so everything is quieter. I even bought like soft chocolate to eat instead of popcorn, but it was a very different take sound-wise.
I was gonna say it wasn't as quiet, and I think that was fine because we understand the concept of you have to be quiet. So for it to have more scoring in the places that are normally meant to be quiet, I thought was fine. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to see the same film twice.
Or do you?
So I was reading that the other day that John Krasinski wasn't sure about doing a part 2. Well, he didn't want to do it, but obviously that's what you get with a successful film. The studio wants to do it, and then obviously John Krasinski had really good ideas about it, so he eventually thought, you know what, I'm just gonna write and direct it. Which is really interesting because I was exactly the same. Really had my reservations about there being a second film to this, just because can you really improve on A Quiet Place? Well, obviously not, but can it live up to it? And I thought it was interesting that he wrote it because he didn't write the first one. So I thought that must have been a challenge, but also super interesting, I think. And I read that Emily Blunt felt the same way, that she also wasn't sure. And then obviously when her husband John Krasinski pitched it to her, she was on board. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting because I feel like that they probably had a very similar feeling to the audience. So which I like is it meant they probably really thought of the audience while making this film and trying to like make it something that people would want to actually really see and not just try and like milk the success of the first one.
Yeah, I remember reading something like that as well. And I can totally understand why John Krasinski would have the reservation. Some films just jump into the sequel right away, and it always makes me a bit scared because, with the films like A Quiet Place was such a different film, such a regional film, and then to have a second one, what are you gonna do different? How are you gonna top it? And I don't think it topped it. I think it was an inferior film, really good film, but inferior. A good addition to the sequel franchise. I don't know if they're gonna do a trilogy. I don't know. But yeah, like to be honest, like if this film didn't exist, I wouldn't feel bad. I don't think I needed this. I watched it and I'm gonna watch a third one if he makes it, but I don't think I need it. So that always makes me really nervous. But the fact that he did it because he had like a reason to it, like he felt that he needed to direct and write a story, and then he told the story through Reagan's point of view, so he tried to do something different with it. That's a good thing to hear because that means that he wasn't, milking it like you said. But I don't know. I don't love sequels. I always watch them, always, but I don't love them. I'm very scared of them, and I'm scared of the success of this one, which was a very successful film. I'm scared that this will mean that it's going to have a third one and a fourth one and a fifth one. So it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's also I'm really glad he did it, just because I know if he would have said no, they would have just gone and find a different director, and I just don't think it would have been the same without him. And I think that always just sucks because I understand the studio is there to like see what films that they're making are profitable, and then they'll make sequels on the ones that were really profitable, such as A Quiet Place. I mean, I didn't think it was gonna top the first film simply because the first film was perfection. How can you top perfection? You cannot. Um, but I think I would say, yeah, it wasn't worse at the same time. Like it was still like really really good.
Yeah, no, I really liked it. I thought that it was interesting how John Krasinski was able to keep the metaphors that he was going for in the first film. Everything that he said about anxieties around being a new father or a new parent. I like that he was able to continue doing that even though, spoilers, his character dies in the first film. Who is, the father of the three children.
Well, I feel the first one was very much about the family, but very much about the parents and how they coped. And this film was a lot more focused on the children, especially Reagan. Of course, on Emmett, like Cillian Murphy's character as well. But yeah, I just thought I really enjoyed like Reagan is such an interesting character anyway because she's literally a deaf, well, both deaf actors and a deaf character who's having to make to like live in a world where not making a sound is so important. But how do you know you're not making a sound if you can't hear anything? That was so scary anyway. But then she's such a like cool girl, and she's so inventive, and she really knows how to handle herself. So that's why I was so happy that John Krasinski chose to make her basically the main character of this film. And it really focused on her a lot.
So that's actually something that I wanted to ask you because, when you're introducing the film, you say that because she's deaf, then that is another hurdle basically that the family has to face. And I was just wondering because I didn't see it like that. I saw that her disability here was actually key because the family already had, knowledge of sign language or knew how to communicate with not just Reagan, but like the whole family talks amongst themselves in sign language when the boy is playing baseball in the first scene, and he, he's really stressed, and then his mom, she signs like just be calm, just breathe. So, you know, that is something that is integrated in the family, not just with Reagan, but like with the family itself, like the whole family dynamic. So I thought that that gave them an upper hand, and I thought that it was so cool that John Krasinski was making this ability empowering, you know? So if you have the disability, then you've got an upper hand here instead of you've got another hurdle to face.
No, yeah, for sure. Because I think the film is really trying to amplify, obviously through this whole like disaster, and I think the first one was doing that as well. But this one even more is that, you know, deafness doesn't mean you can't live like a normal person, and you know the fact that Reagan is so inventive and so you know has found ways to be able to sort of like hear or to sort of really pay attention to her surroundings is, you know, I hate, it's not, well, I mean, it might be listed as a disability, but like it's not disabling her. And I think that's what the point the film is also trying to make in general, that we shouldn't be seeing people that are deaf as disabled people, because they are very much able to, you know, save themselves and be awesome. But what I really liked, actually, just to stick to that topic, is that obviously Emmett becomes a really big part of the film, who's not familiar with dealing with deaf people, who's not familiar with sign language. And I really liked how the film also tried to reflect that. Like, why is it always a deaf person's responsibility to make sure you're able to communicate with them? And I thought that was a really good part. But then also they still showed how they were able to communicate without having those similar ways to speak to each other. And that makes a lot of sense, because then they would have raised their whole family with sign language. And I really like that too, that they also communicate with the other children in that way. And I thought that was really interesting. Um, and I really liked that it opened on day one. Not that the whole film was a flashback, but only the opening scene. Because originally I was like, oh, is this just John Krasinski wanting to still act in the film? But it wasn't. It was 100% actually. It was actually setting up way more. Because for me, it set up, obviously, Emmett's character being someone they already knew, as well as the kind of the deep bond that like Reagan and her dad has, and how much she wants to be like him. And I really like that they showed that in the first scene, and also like how he was the kind of person that wanted to save people and that was like looking after everyone. Because even when Reagan and the dad like are when they're hiding for the creatures for the first time, it's the dad Lee who's going around to other people telling them what to do and trying to help them, and that obviously got really reflects back on Reagan in this film. So yeah, that was really, yeah, it was great how they decided to do it slightly different and focus on her in a lot more depth. And because I feel like Evelyn, Emily Blunt's character, was very much supporting this time, and I think that's fine because she had her big moments in the first one, and um, yeah, but it was still like it was very much about everyone, but it was definitely, I thought it's Reagan and Emmett in this film, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Like I think both of them have an arc, whereas the other ones are just supporting. So we're going to introduce the spoilers right now. If you want to keep all of the surprises of A Quiet Place Part 2, then stop listening and come back later. In the beginning of the film, we see a prelude to the first film, so we see what happens right on the day that everything happens. And then, so we're introduced to this Emmett character, and we learn that he's a friend of the family, to the Abbotts, and their children are friends as well. When he comes in part 2, you know, after Lee has already died, he doesn't take Lee's place as, you know, a love interest for Evelyn. So he's battling his own anxieties around fatherhood, in the sense that he, you know, he had his own family and his family died. So I think that he's battling, you know, the shame of being the survivor, the fact that he outlived his son, which, you know, a parent should not outlive their children. And here he has, so all the insecurities that maybe John Krasinski was feeling, you know, of not being able to do enough, not being able to secure the children or keep the children safe, is now being played out with Emmett. And Emmett, has a big arc because he goes from not wanting to help the Abbots to saying like, oh, no one that survived until now is worth saving. So he has a really dark um, view of the world that it's right now. Um, and then he's saying he is not worth saving as well, and neither are the Abbots, which the film shows that is not correct. But anyway, so he has a whole arc from not wanting to help, from them being nice to Reagan, and then to when they're at the island towards the end of the film. Spoiler again. He saves a child when the monsters come to this island. So the only person that he saves is a little boy. So I think it's interesting that he has this whole arc of redemption, not necessarily redemption, but like coming to terms with what happened, accepting it, and then moving on to then saving someone else. Evelyn was basically there. I mean, yeah, she went through major stuff. Like she was very tired, I think. But so I mean, fair enough that she had to, just relax in this film. But I think that Marcus, like um we were able to see like in some scenes his depth, like as a human being. Like for example, when they're in that vault, or the thing that they keep losing the air. So like when he was there, and then he had one tank of oxygen, and then he had to keep switching between taking some for himself and then giving some for his sister, and then almost being on the verge of passing out. And if he was going to pass out, then he was going to die. So the way that he was managing this near death, um or like just taking the amount that he needed and then giving it to his sister, and then being able to like take some back as well. Like I thought that that scene itself just showed the character in such a depth that you were able to see not just a kid, but such a mature person, from that age. And I mean, poor Marcus, like he just falls into a bear trap at the beginning of the film. So like, poor him. But yeah, no, like I thought that scene just was great to show a little bit more of the character.
I think it was really interesting as well because I feel like that scene was very much about him having to choose between surviving on his own or like survive or like saving his family, because it must be like crazy when you have to think like, okay, well, I'm about to faint and probably die, or I could take more from the baby, but then that potentially could like stop the baby's oxygen supply. And obviously, I mean, it might feel obvious, like you'd obviously make sure the baby stays alive, but like in a very much life or death situation, it might be very different. And I thought actually as well, because we're talking about spoilers now anyway, at the very, very end, when it was very much that contrast between Reagan trying to save Emmett and Marcus sort of saving Evelyn and the baby, I just really liked that because I felt like for me that moment was very much. I love that Marcus sort of then stepped up and did do the right thing, and I just loved how that made that to me what the start of the film was very much like Evelyn is really lost. She has all these children she has to look after, and her husband's no longer there. And then they find Emmett, and she thinks she has to beg him to help them because she thinks she can't do it alone. But then actually, she's not alone. Her children are like super brave, and that's because of their dad is always, well, her as well. Like they've been just like amazing role models in trying to save them. Because the recurring thing that I really liked is what Emmett said. That he said, "Oh, people that have survived this long aren't worth saving, or aren't worth knowing." And I thought it was really interesting because we obviously know that this family is very much worth helping, and they have not done anything awful to anyone to survive.
Yeah, and I think that was a good contrast because, post-apocalypse films always show like the monsters are not the real danger, people are. And although they fall on that trope that there's always going to be a gang and there's always going to be that thing. So I like how by Emmett saying that he's, and we know that, the Abbott family is worth saving and he will eventually as well be worth saving. I like that contrasts with the idea of post-apocalypse films that we have, that there's always going to be a gang. However, of course, the film does fall on this trope when they have Emmett and Reagan falling on a trap on the pier, and people are going to kill them or whatever. I mean, who are those people? And and yeah, so like they managed to get Emmett, and then they're taking Reagan, and I was like, I hate when films, when especially post-apocalypse films, like where men are just the worst and they always rape the woman. Like they see a woman, they're like, oh yeah, rape. I was like, can we not have that in a film? And then, we didn't have that per se in here, but we had like they were alluding to it. They were taking Reagan, and the way that the guy touched her shoulder, and the way that he was making her walk, we just knew what was going to happen. So just by putting Reagan in that position, that made me feel ill. I just didn't like that scene. I thought it was so unnecessary.
I think, well, because it was very much as soon as that scene started, I was like, oh, was that like the whole thing that Emmett was saying about people, who survive aren't worth saving, blah blah blah. Was that all foreshadowing? Because now the film's gonna change and they're gonna be kidnapped by these people. But then actually, that was like a 5 minute scene. It just really reminded me of like The Walking Dead or something. We have like a whole like Negan thing, and I'm really glad. I'm glad that they moved away from it, but I also just thought like maybe it wasn't worth putting in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad it was only 5 minutes, but the scene shouldn't have happened. I don't know what the scene added to the story. Like, we don't need to be scared of humans. We're already very scared of the monsters. We don't need to have the stakes higher. The stakes are already super high. And just them going to the island, getting to the pier and going to the island was already such a effort and such a difficult thing to do, that by putting humans posing as a threat just added nothing to the story.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I guess, like, I was thinking, well, I guess that scene was there to show why Emmett doesn't have any faith in people anymore, because that's probably the kind of people he's been meeting, and not, like, people like the Abbott family. So I guess it makes sense to show, like, look, Emmett was right to be a bit suspicious.
Yeah, maybe just added to just another layer of Emmett trying to save Reagan. Like, he's saving her yet once again, despite saying that no one was worth saving, and this having all this shame from having outlived his son.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we are meant to believe that Emmett probably has also done bad things in order to survive once he lost his family. Um, I always just wonder as well, when you're like just by yourself like that, like what makes it even worth it to survive at all then? Like, why are you still around? But then maybe it's just like human to not, you know, it's it's probably like, I think that it's human to somewhere have hope, like maybe someday. But then he didn't really seem to have hope, because when Reagan and Marcus said, "Oh, there's something beyond the sea," they he didn't believe in any of that anymore. So it did make me kind of think like, well, why is Emmett still here? He must have had a glimmer of something. But then he said he knew that the Abbott family needed his help, and he never showed up for them. Um, but I really thought his arc was super. It didn't. In a lot of films like this, where someone has an arc from like, oh, I'm such a dickhead and I'm not gonna help, to like that whole arc where he's like kind of a changed person. I thought it was actually like a really good one. I mean, Killian Murphy was so good as well. I thought he was such a great addition to the cast, and his chemistry with Reagan as well. Like, they really had that sort of, I don't want to say father daughter relationship, because he wasn't her father, but almost like a stepfather bond he created with her. Like, you could really tell, like, by the end of the film, he really loved her.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily use the word stepfather, because then that implies that he's got like something to do with Evelyn, and that's precisely what I like that the film didn't do with him. and Evelyn, like the film didn't try to make them into a couple at all at any point. So I really like that because whenever there's a scene like a film like that where people are just dying all the time and it's such a difficult, I don't know. So because I always think like when films have when a film is like that, people are dying all the time and the world has gone to shit and stuff like that, and they invite like love interests to the story, and then it's just like, who has the time? Like, who would want romance right now? Like, no.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because I hadn't considered that they try to move away from her meeting a new man and like him becoming like a new like husband to her. I mean, to be honest, like I do think it it's only natural maybe for people to want to connect to other adults, but so like I feel very much like beyond this film in the future, Evelyn and Emmett would most likely become romantically involved, but only because that's just how it works if there's no one else around, kind of thing. Like during the apocalypse, I feel like that when people always say like I'd never like be involved with you even if we'd be the last people on earth, that's probably not true. Like it's just one of those things. Like I feel like it's probably really human that you're gonna try and find a connection again.
Yeah, okay, fair. Like, I would be okay with that happening, outside of the film, when we're no longer watching, but I'm glad that it didn't happen inside the film.
Yeah, exactly. And it didn't have to be in the film for us to know that that could be where things are headed. Um, but yeah, I really enjoyed that the whole relationship was very based on him and Reagan, and that Reagan is the one that showed him like, you know, think people are potentially worth helping, or life is still worth living even if you've maybe lost some people. I I mean it was really really sad because I think while obviously the Abbott family had lost the little child in the first one, and they lost the dad, let's be honest, like they lost a lot, but they still had each other, and Emmett literally had nobody. So it's a very different thing. But it really felt like him and Reagan were 100% like bonded by the end, and I loved that. Yeah, the only thing I do want to say, and there was a few moments in this film that the first one didn't have, is the last minute save thing that happened a few times. I just thought, just it's a little bit too like horror film tropey to have that. For example, the one where Reagan was literally like about to be snatched by the creature, and then Emmett is there. Like it's just things like that could always work slightly differently, and obviously I guess I put that in because Reagan is not going to die, like at least not this early on. So obviously someone's gonna help her, but I don't know. I always just feel like, and I thought it would have been a cool moment to explore how cool Reagan is and that she killed a creature all by herself because she shouldn't need saving. But I just thought like that was what is one of those things where I don't like those last minute saves in horror films because they're just like so overdone, and it just becomes a little bit like it makes you feel so safe because certain characters are just gonna like live.
I just think that perhaps that scene was just like to introduce the fact that to introduce the bond that him and Reagan were about to create, and plus the fact that like I said before, the whole fatherhood metaphor, and then now he's saving a child that he wasn't able to save before. So that's kind of him redeeming himself for not saving his son. I mean, I know that I've said this before, but I do think that he's got a lot of redemption moments. Like he's saving Reagan, and the last minute thing that you said, he saves her when she's on this train or whatever that is. And then when she's at the end, when she's putting like something on the radio, and the little boy on the island, like I said before. So I do think that he's trying to redeem himself by saving all those children, those moments. I don't know what you think about that.
I do like that theme, and I think that theme was also explored when Marcus had to choose between him and the baby in the vault, because I think it's again like a whole natural instinct of you have to save people that are younger than you because you're like what you were saying before, you're not meant to outlive people that are much younger than you at the end of the day. Like if you have a child, you're not meant to outlive that child. So it makes sense that adults or even like in Marcus and the baby's case, like you're much older, so give the younger person a chance to have a life. But I think that was really cute as well with Emmett because it obviously turned that whole thing around like, oh, people are not worth saving, but obviously he didn't feel that way about Reagan. He was like, of course she is worth saving more than he was worth like going on. What did you think of that whole bit at the island? Because I thought obviously it was really interesting and it meant that they had a community to go to see or to go to eventually once they would have picked up the rest of the family. But I thought it was another bit I felt wasn't super fleshed out, and maybe that's because they were setting up for maybe a part three or something. I just thought it was a bit too quick and a bit too like we didn't explore, for example, like I don't know what that guy was called. I think was it just called Men on I. No, he had a name. Let me just have a look. Because I was looking on IMDb and like one of them is just literally called like Man on Island. So I'm a little bit like, oh my, yeah, I can't really find out who he is, but basically like the main man on the island who kind of set up that whole community. Um, and then he died, and it was a little bit like, I don't like it when characters are introduced and then they die like a scene later. It's just a little bit like, I don't really care about this person that much. I mean, obviously, it felt a bit rough because it's like, oh my god, he set up this whole community and these two, like Emmett and Reagan show up and then they bring this creature in and now he's dead.
I don't know if you've seen the documentary on Shudder that is horror noir, and then they have a lot of tropes. They present a lot of tropes about black characters in horror films, and then there's one trope of this wise black man or black woman that is just showing the white person the way, and you know I'm sure that that wasn't the intention, but that's what happened. Like this black man set up this whole thing, so he's super important, like he's a badass, and then in comes Reagan and Emmett, and he dies. So he's like, okay, so he was just there for the sake of, he did something nice outside of the camera, and then once we've got our protagonist there, we don't care about him anymore. We can just kill him. So I felt like that was a bit odd.
And also, were they meant to go to the radio station? Like to, I guess they were to like blast like the sound to have all the creatures come there or something. But I found it a bit like too coincidental maybe, and unless if like I missed something.
No, actually, the sound was for Marcus to come, because he was gonna keep listening to the radio, and then Reagan was gonna change the music, and then he would know that he needed to come.
What did you think of like the ending? As in like literally like the shot where they cut. So basically Reagan shooting the creature as well as Marcus shooting the creature, and then it literally rolled to the credits. Because I was expecting something to happen after, or see like the family move to the island, or see something more happen. But then it was also pretty cool at the same time.
I thought it was a way of saying like, fuck that. Like they just, finished the film by killing the monsters. I also felt like it could potentially be a way of introducing a third film.
I think it was very much, it could have been setting up for a third film, but it could have also just been like, because I was thinking, if Evelyn and the other kids came to the island as well, we didn't really need a whole extra 10 minutes to explore that. Like, we can also just assume they made it to the island, they're living there happily ever after. But there's definitely room for a third film. But I would just be, well, I know that they've done well with the second one, but I would be scared about a third film, I think.
Yeah, I would be very scared of a third film as well. I don't want it. Like I said, I will watch it if it comes out, but I don't want to. I don't feel like I need it. I feel like the two films work well as one film. Okay, so like we have a continuation between the two films, and then the end. Like that's it. Like I don't think it needs another installment nor a continuation to the story.
I do question if they can pull that off a third time, because the stakes get higher per sequel, I think. Because with the second one, I feel like all you need to do with a second film usually is like, okay, this needs to be at the least like not ruin the first one. But with the third one, because it's like it has to then wrap up like a trilogy, as well as make it almost like nostalgic to the first one and things like that. And I just don't know how they would do that. But if everyone that was involved with the first two is involved again, then maybe they could do it. But I hope it's gonna be the same thing as with this one, where, for example, John Krasinski is only on board if he's 100% has, you know, good ideas for it and he's happy and confident that it's gonna be a good film.
So let me do the famous question. Would you recommend this film?
Yes, 100%. And I'd recommend these films to non-horror films as well as non-horror fans as well as horror fans. I know that my non-horror friends are not going to watch it, but I still think they should. It's one of those films that I think is good regardless of if you like horror, but it is scary enough for people to still be a bit turned off from it. But I just think for me it has that emotional side to it. It has amazing characters. It sounds and looks so good. I always think like anyone should watch this film.
And like I said, like the whole idea of the film not being silent enough, I think that played with my expectations, and my expectations basically were not met. So I really wanted the film to be silent and to explore all of that aesthetic, you know, the silence, and then making us, the audience, feel scared for making noises, you know, when you're scared for the character and you think that somehow your actions are going to impact the character as well, like you're feeling so deeply for the characters on the screen that you're literally not making a sound, you know, like when a character just goes underwater and you hold your breath, so like the same thing. And I felt like here I didn't feel that during the film.
I wonder if what you're saying about not being inside the film, it might be part of the sound design being slightly different, as in like the first one obviously it was very much it was quiet pretty much at every moment you're meant to be quiet, and the second one has a more score over those bits. Um, so it did maybe take you out of that bit slightly more. But like I kind of said earlier, I don't mind it not being exactly the same because I feel like that's what the first film kind of explored. It's like how is it for them, and now we're more just like exploring. Well, I don't really know, but like other things.
So that was it for A Quiet Place Part 2. Thank you for listening to our thoughts. The Power of Pod Compels You is produced and hosted by Bruna Lucas and Lisa Gertz, and edited by Lisa Gertz. The music is by Julia Sofia, the artwork by Sibeli Lucas, and the narration by Bruna. This podcast is hosted on Buzzsprout. If you want to suggest a particular topic or film for us to discuss, then please email us on thepowerofpodcompelsyou@gmail.com or Twitter @powerofpod.